Good evening. Thank you for joining us for our Bible study. I was messing up there a little bit, not getting my cue. Thank you for joining us. I'm Pastor Keith Davis. This is Ashley Jones with us this evening and every week as we go through the Bible. We're going through the Bible, a survey of each book. We're in the book of Joshua, beginning that book this evening. We don't know if it's going to take one or two times, but we're going to give it a try and see if we can get this done. But there is a lot here to unpack. We can say that with every book.
Oh, yeah. It just depends on how deep you want to go.
Yeah, it does. I would say that the theme here is entering Canaan. And I didn't read that anywhere, but just from studying it, having done some other studies, this is the time they exited Egypt. And the book of Exodus all the way through Deuteronomy deals with that. And then now they're entering Canaan. This goes all the way back to the promise to Abraham.
Right.
Genesis 16, 15, I think. I get it mixed up, 15, 16, 16, 15. But where God told him that 4 generations later,
Right.
that his seed, his people would come back there to Canaan to inhabit it. And he talked about the evil of the Amalekites was not quite full yet. So there's a lot there with them, not only Israel, but when God says, there's enough of that evil.
Yeah.
And he did that with all the Canaanites, Amalekites, all of those people there. And so now is the time.
Right.
They're here to go in to occupy the land, to defeat the enemies. Now, we know there's a lot of spiritual truth here. Let me just hit that quickly. Because all the way from Israel coming out of Egypt, which is always a picture of the world, we've already talked about this in previous messages and studies, but entering Canaan is not a picture of heaven, finally getting to heaven.
All right.
There is an old song that talks about that. No, this is somebody has likened it to the New Testament filling of the Holy Spirit. It's a victorious Christian life. There are still battles.
Yeah.
That's why it's not heaven.
Right.
But it is the promised land.
Right.
You know, a place where God has prepared for them here in this world. So, the name Joshua,
Yeah.
always we relate it to the name Jesus in the New Testament.
Yeah. You got to keep in mind that when we're talking about Joshua, Jesus, the letter J wasn't even invented until the 1400s.
Yeshua.
Yeah, so it wouldn't have sounded like this.
Yeah.
Especially in Hebrew.
Yeah. And you and I have talked about the Hebrew language and how much we would desire to know it,
Yeah.
to be able to use it in our studies. But we do read behind people and use that just like that information that you have there.
Use the interlinear.
Yeah,
We have an app, the interlinear app. I use it all the time.
I used it yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's going in. It is going to be a military campaign. We are going to get to this in our first part, but Joshua replaces Moses.
Yeah.
And that's very significant.
We talked a little bit about this last time because, Moses, he leaves Egypt and they're wanting to kill him.
Yeah.
And he leaves at 40 years old. We tend to think he was a young man, or not to say that 40 isn't young, but younger man.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't return until he's 80.
Right.
And we don't ever really picture that he's 80 when he leads over 2 million people out of Egypt. And then he spends 40 more years in the wilderness. And he dies at 120. He had those 40 years with his replacement that's going to come up with him.
Yes. Now, I know it's not in our outline, but you have a good little piece of information about Joshua.
Yeah, we don't realize that he was a slave in Egypt.
Who says that?
I know, we just
Who
kind of
talks
tie
about
him in when it comes to, he was sent as a spy, one of the 12 spies.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like we kind of just pick up there with him. We don't realize where he came from before that.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a slave in Egypt. So he's
Young.
coming. Yeah, he's coming out of the same place. So when those other 10 spies, when they come back and they give bad report,
Yeah.
he's got the same background as they do. What makes him different than the other 10, or him and Caleb different than the other 10?
And I can put it in one word, belief.
Exactly.
Yeah. They believed, the others doubted.
And okay, so now let's take that to our spiritual lives today.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
There's a whole correlation there.
Absolutely. I knew a preacher wrote a book one time on that, the sin of unbelief within the church.
Oh, I wonder who that was.
I don't know, but it's a small book. But, you know, it is a sin that affects our spiritual walk with God.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to see God from the beginning when he called Abraham and he says, hey, I'm going to make your descendants as numerable as the stars in the sky and the sand of the seashore.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you this land.
Yeah.
Abraham had to learn to trust God. And he did. He had faith.
And he never received the promise, as the Bible tells us.
Right.
But he never wavered in his faith.
Right. And then you've got it with his son. You've got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob.
Yeah.
That promise is given again, and it's given again. And now where are we at? We're coming in that fourth generation. This is just from Abraham.
Right.
From that fourth generation from him, they're in Egypt. These are the 12 tribes that are going to be the tribes of Israel that's going to become his nation.
And we know that the trip from Egypt to Canaan could have been a very short one. But because of their unbelief, the whole nation, if you will, of Israel rejected what God had told them and what Moses was telling them, and Caleb and Joshua. So they wandered for 40 years in the wilderness.
There is so much spiritual application right here. You're talking, how long do we wander
Yes,
in the wilderness?
absolutely. And I remember seeing a map of this, and it was like wandering with little circles.
Yeah.
You know, they're on the east side of the Jordan, and it just falls down through there, just
Yeah.
they're wandering.
And you think when you read through, and Scott's done this several times, he reads through this one section and he was like, why, how come they don't believe him by now? He's already done this, he's done this, he's done this. And are we not the same?
We are. We are.
In our humanity, God's done this for us and this for us and this for us. Why would we ever doubt?
How easily we forget,
Yeah.
not just who God is, but what he has done.
Yeah, it makes me think of a quote, and I read it a long time ago, and it says that we are more likely to remember what someone has done to us rather than for us. We remember those who, do something wrong against us.
Yeah,
But what about when somebody helps you out?
right. Right. Well, that's just a snapshot as we go into the book of Joshua,
Yeah.
leading up to it, setting it up for this 3 military campaigns. This is in the latter part of our study that we'll see how Joshua did this in leading. I went back one time and looked everywhere that Joshua's name was mentioned before this. He's a servant of Moses. He's a soldier. There's many ways that God was preparing him. If I remember correctly, as Moses come off of the Mount Sinai, Joshua's with him. I think we talked about that.
Yeah. But God knew Moses and what it would take to prepare him.
Yeah.
And he knows what it's going to take to prepare Caleb. And he knows that this is what the people are going to need when they come into this promised land.
Right, right. So they've got, God has the right man. He puts Joshua in as the leader. You know, God's the one that chose him. And at this time, we're still looking at a theocracy
Yeah.
led by God. It's going to be later on that they ask for a king.
1 Samuel.
Yeah, and they mess up when they do that.
Yeah. Why would you want an earthly king when you can have a heavenly father over you?
Perfect, all-knowing, infinite God.
Right.
And you trade, in some sense, trade him for a finite, sinful human being.
And we won't get that theocracy back until the millennial reign.
Yeah, it's a good point. Good point. So God gives a commission to Joshua here in Joshua chapter 1. I love some of the things he says there to him. I'm jumping over here just a little bit, but God places Joshua there. He has prepared him, and then Joshua prepares Israel militarily to go in. This is the conquest of Canaan. You and I have talked about this before. We don't have it in this study, but all the names of the people in Canaan, the Canaanites, the Amalekites,
Yeah.
the Perizzites, everybody but the termites,
Yeah.
as some preachers have said. All of these in the Hebrew describe things that they were to defeat. When we look at the meaning of their names, it shows things that we should defeat in our own lives.
Yeah. And just to look at the Bible, and we were talking a little bit about this before we go on, about the connections that you make now within the Bible, like just names
Yeah.
or places or how the meaning of words. And it's like the more you study, the more you realize how many things are connected.
Yeah.
Just like you said, those names connecting to our spiritual life. It's amazing.
It is. As a pastor, reading and following Moses is a great thing to do because of how he led this huge mass of people.
Yeah.
As a Christian, following these journeys
Yeah.
shows how God can meet our needs, provisions, protection, and all of these things. It is so applicable to our lives. So they're going in as a military. They're 40 years after they spied out the land before. Now they're going to go in, spy it out, and there's a certain lady
Yeah.
that needs mentioned.
Well, Rahab, and lots of times, I mean, we might get a Sunday morning sermon on her every once in a while, but not a lot. Most of the time, she's going to be like a Bible study account that we read, but she's very important.
Well, most of the time we're going to hear her name in Matthew 1:5, I believe it is, that I read a little bit earlier today, in the genealogy.
Yeah, and you're thinking, what? Wasn't she that harlot that was
Yeah.
in the book of Joshua? Yes, she was, but you know what? God can change people.
He can, and it shows that God not only cared about the Hebrews, the Jews, but he also cared about the Gentiles.
And in this account, she has free will choice,
Yes.
and she decides to help God's men.
And she said to the spies, "We have heard about you defeating these kings and these kings. We trembled. Our strength left us." And she's
Yeah.
talking about the men
Yeah.
of Jericho. But she made the decision, and they didn't.
Yeah. Kind of reminds
Yeah.
me of the ark.
Yes.
Noah and his family made the decision. Why didn't the others?
There was,
I read something. It's been a while back. So this is off my memory. I'm talking about like 10 years back or so. Jericho has been discovered.
yeah.
And when they go in and they were uncovering things there, they realized that one part of the wall still stood.
There you go.
Yeah, and it was the type of city where the homes were built into the wall.
Yeah.
And so that would make sense. It would fit
Yeah.
right with God's account here. And I was like, you know what? Isn't that amazing? Just one part of the wall was still standing.
Now if you tell me the cord was still found, I'm sure it had decayed.
I don't know anything about that one.
But God they told, Rahab or the spies told her, put this cord, this scarlet cord,
Yes.
and the whole army would know you don't touch that section.
Yeah.
And it's a picture of the blood.
Yeah.
It's the picture of the blood, scarlet, and her faith in God. She was saved the same way we're saved.
Right. And immediately, like right after this, I guess like the next time she's mentioned, she's in the genealogy of David.
Yeah.
She's mentioned in the genealogy of David. Let me give you just a little bit about that. So Rahab's a Canaanite, and you would think, my goodness, why is a Canaanite in there because of all those ites, that we were just talking
Yeah.
about. So she hid the spies. She was faithful, and the red cord. But she is going to have a son named Boaz.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I didn't know Rahab was his mama. So Boaz marries Ruth. They have Obed. Obed has Jesse, and Jesse has
David.
King David.
Yeah.
So you would look back and you would think, oh, well, that's a shame because she was a harlot. Why is she in the Messiah's or King David's, family tree there? But it shows the power of God and how he can change this Canaanite woman where the Canaanites worshiped the false gods. They did horrible things when they worshiped
Right.
these false gods. And yet she is here in the genealogy of Jesus Christ.
And it did not take away the Jewish lineage.
No.
She's married in
Yes.
and is part of it that way. But again, it's a great example, as the outline says, of salvation by God's grace through faith.
And in a patriarchal society, most of the time you're going to go from male to male to male. We go to Genesis chapter 5. It's Adam begat Seth. It's all males.
Yeah.
And then when you go into like Chronicles and I think Genesis 12 or 13, it's all males, all males. And then all of a sudden you get to the genealogies in the New Testament and it's all males, but where'd she come? Where did she come from? I'm just saying, you know, why is she specifically put in there when most of the time it would have been all males listed? There's a reason.
And the same thing with Ruth.
Yes.
You know.
Only two.
Same thing with her. So again, the grace of God
Yes.
for the Gentile nations. God is using the Israelites to show the whole world that there is one true God.
Yes.
He's greater than all the gods of Egypt. He's greater than the gods that Joshua is going to detail in Joshua 24. He's going to talk about all these. And he's greater than all. That was the mission of the nation of Israel. That is the mission of the church today.
Right.
Same thing.
Right.
It's not to come in and be a fishbowl. Yes, we worship together and all, but it's the Great Commission is to go to the world and tell them about Christ.
Yeah.
So, all right, so now this is a great thing that you've put up here. The commander of the Lord in chapter 5. I love that passage.
Yeah.
I love the question of Joshua. I don't know if we have time for me to read this.
We'll make time because it looks like we're going to do two of these anyway.
It looks like it. It sure does.
There's just a lot of good stuff in Joshua.
Yeah, yeah. So in Joshua chapter 5, again, they're going in for the battles. And I think I have one more page to turn here. So it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, a man, capital M, stood opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" So he said, "No, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Wow.
Commander of the armies of the Lord.
So God was not on the side of Israel. God's on his side.
Yeah.
He's on his side.
Yeah.
We have to be on his side.
This kind of reminds me of Moses when Moses says, well, you know what? If the Lord's not going, I'm not going either.
Yeah.
Moses was a Lord follower. Mm-hmm. That's what we're supposed to be. That's what they're supposed to be there as well.
That's right. So we better get on the Lord's side.
Yeah.
You know, we can't say, God, just come and you and I'll hang out. No, we better get with him.
Yeah.
So I love that. And it also shows something else, that the battle was the Lord's.
Yeah.
It wasn't Israel through their might and strategy that's going to defeat them. Sure, they're going to be in the battle, but it was that unseen
Yeah.
battle of the Lord. We're going to get to another spot where that comes into play as well.
Yeah.
Now, most people believe that this is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus himself.
Yeah. Also called a Christophany or a theophany.
Pre-incarnate,
Yeah.
yeah, appearance by Christ, as some believe in the book of Daniel with the 3 Hebrews and the fire.
And why wouldn't it be?
Sure.
He existed.
Absolutely. So it's not like he's just sitting in heaven waiting to come. He has his pre-incarnate appearances before he came incarnate. The war with Canaan, we've already mentioned in Genesis 15:16. It had to do with judgment. The judgment on them, they have seen. It's not that they're ignorant
Right.
to God. They have seen. I find that true today. In talking with people who are not in church at all, I'm amazed by what they do know
Yeah.
about God, his word, but they have chosen not to follow him at this time.
Yeah.
So that was a choice of theirs in that day. Pick up here, talk about the war, now the conquest of Canaan by Israel. They go in first to central Canaan. This is strategy. This is the way God is leading. So they go in and sort of split Canaan. They go into the central part, then they'll go into the southern and northern part there. Now, there's one battle that if I had to name one battle, I could name Jericho.
Yeah.
That's their entrance. But also Ai.
Yeah.
That's,
They learned a lesson there.
they learned a big lesson there, and we can learn from it.
Yeah.
You know, they go into Ai, they're told not to take any spoils whatsoever.
Yeah.
And they do. Well, they actually do from the battle before. So they go into Ai, and they get beat.
Yep.
A small group, they just send in, I forget how many to take care of them. Doesn't work.
Right.
Joshua falls on his face before God, and God says, get up off your face. There's sin in the camp.
Yeah.
And they go and do the process, find this Achan, I believe. I didn't go back and look at that.
That sounds right in my head.
Yeah, yeah. So they find this out, and I'm going to say that I believe that his whole family knew, since the whole family paid the
Oh, yeah.
penalty.
Yeah.
So his children were not little bitty ones, but these were adults, and so they all pay for that sin.
Well,
They were trying to help him hide the stuff, I believe, all of that.
Well, you go back to chapter 3 even, and you have in your notes here, God would do what he said, even with miracles, if they would follow him.
Yeah.
It's an obedience thing. And if God lets this slide in AI, what's going to happen when they continue to conquer all the other places? You can't have that, because once you let it slide one time, oh well, he got away with it, so
Right.
now I'm going to do it.
Sure.
You can't do that. It's not going to work.
No. So the thing in our life is, when things begin to go wrong, sometimes we have to say, do I have sin in my life?
Yeah.
You know, and we're talking about known sin. We're talking about sin they're trying to hide.
But doesn't sin it's kind of like that too? If you let it go this one time, it's easier to do it the next time, and then it's snowballing.
Sure it is. Pretty soon it doesn't even bother you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no doubt. So now, have we come to the part where the sun stands still?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. I don't think so.
I jump ahead of things, and then I get behind. Then I get to talking about how many things. So the known sins need to be dealt with, and that's what they do.
Yeah.
And then God begins to bless them again and give them the victories.
Well, maybe
in
you
these
are, because
battles.
that happens in 9 and 10. That happens in 9 and 10.
Yeah.
So we're kind of right there.
Okay.
But that's one of the memorable moments from the book of Joshua, the sun standing still, because this is something supernatural. How many times have you ever noticed the sun stand still?
No.
It doesn't happen. This is something outside of nature's laws. So this is why I think it happened. The last generation, they cannot enter the promised land. They saw all these amazing miracles in Egypt, coming out of Egypt. God, preserved them for those 40 years.
Yeah.
This new generation, they're going to see some miracles too. They need to see that God is the creator God in control.
I think that's a great point because God does something else as they're entering in that we did not mention.
Yeah, so if you was to do trivia questions and you was to ask people, when did God part the waters? Let's just put it that vaguely.
Even part the waters for Israel,
Yeah,
or how many times?
yeah.
And what?
And most people are going to say, the Red Sea.
Yeah.
That's when it happened.
Yeah.
Lots of times we miss the second one.
Yeah. It's to the second generation. We talked about the first and second generation in the book of Numbers. And so you're right on target, I think, with part of why God did that, to show his power to this new generation.
Yeah.
He parted the waters. He very unconventionally has them defeat Jericho, not by going in traditional war.
It's bizarre.
Is,
I mean,
yeah.
as a military strategy, it's bizarre.
Yeah. So, but it works because God is the one orchestrating it, and the walls of Jericho fall down. I happen to think of this. It does have a little bit to do with this, but not.
Okay.
There's two people that have songs written about them in this book. Joshua fit the battle with Jericho.
Yeah.
And Caleb, I want that mountain. There was an old song like that. I want that
That sounds
mountain.
vaguely familiar.
Yeah.
I'd have to listen to it again.
Yeah, it was probably popular in the 70s.
No songs about Rahab.
Way back, nothing I know of. Hey, so And how fitting because
Yeah.
of these two men. So, yes, God is doing that. So, what's the other? What is the reason for the sun standing still? We talked about it a little bit before.
Yeah,
we
I mean,
started.
it's to prolong the battle.
Yeah.
You know, just so I mean, if you're in a good position and you can't fight in the dark, Lord, can you make it stay lighter longer so we can win this battle?
To finish the defeat.
But then again, if he does that, it's still not on him and his warriors. It's God's, because
Yeah.
if God hadn't have done the miracle, he wouldn't have won the battle.
And in that same chapter, there were more who died from the hailstones than who brought those.
That one.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't remember that from like when I was a kid. You know, like you're raised up in church and everything, and
Yeah.
I mean, you do the reading plans where you read the whole Bible or whatever. And I was an adult before I go back, and I was like, wait a minute, let me read that again.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
More died from the hailstones. Again, this is something. How many times has that ever happened?
Right.
We went over hailstones. You remember when we were
in
going?
Revelation.
Yeah, we're in Revelation, and I mean, we've had hailstones, pretty big, that's been recorded in history, but nothing like
No.
that.
No. So he killed more that day than Israel with the hailstones than Israel killed with the sword.
Yeah.
Again, they couldn't take credit and say, look how mighty we are.
No, and I think everything that's happening to this generation, it's to be a memorial too.
Yeah.
You know, was it in chapter 4 they set up the stones as a memorial? Moses was teach your children, teach your children.
Yeah.
Joshua, he's going to use this as a teaching moment too.
Yeah.
We're going to set up these stones, teach your children, teach your children. And we'll get to that probably next time.
Yeah, maybe so, but they were always setting up memorials.
Oh, yeah.
Coming out of I can't remember if it was the Jordan or the Red Sea, and they set up the
The Jordan.
stones.
I'm pretty sure it was the Jordan.
12 stones, I
Yeah.
believe, about the 12 tribes of Israel. So always about God, what he has done, and remembering what he had done,
Yeah.
memorializing it.
Do you want to keep going, or do you want to?
We can stop right here. I didn't look at the time, but we can stop right here. And we can pick up with this in our next study.
Yeah.
We will let the people of our church know that since we have Vacation Bible School starting next Sunday, it will
Yes.
be the following week after that.
Right.
So thank you for joining us, and we'll try to pull out more from this great book of Joshua. I want to look at a couple of the great quotes from him and from Caleb.
Yeah.
There's some great quotes there that I want to look at.
One of those is Scott's favorite verse. Y'all probably know it.
Joshua 24.
Yeah.
Yeah,
As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.
yeah,
Good quote.
it is. So we'll talk about some of those quotes and challenges, along with as a tremendous challenge
yeah.
to Israel.
Yeah. We're not going to encourage you here and make you have the feels. This is throwing it down challenge.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. And let me close this in prayer. Father, thank you for your word. It's not for history or information only, but it's also for application to our own lives. Help us to be hearers and doers of your word. Help us to learn from these, Lord, and what they went through. Help us, Lord, to be faithful in our own lives and following you. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make it.